Welcome to Meaningful Work Matters. I'm Andrew Soren. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Aho, professor of philosophy and chair of the Department of Communication and Philosophy at Florida Gulf Coast University. Kevin's work spans existentialism, phenomenology, and, generally the philosophy of health and illness. He explores what it means to live well, to face suffering, and to find meaning in what can be a very finite life. In this conversation, we talk about how higher education and the humanities are being reshaped by neoliberal values, and what happens when the pursuit of meaning gives way to a pursuit of metrics. Kevin also shares his perspective on the culture of busyness, the rise of the wellness industry, and a concept he uses called the empty self, and what it means about our collective longing for connection. This is an honest and deeply human conversation about love, about community, and about what philosophy can still teach us about living and working with purpose. Let's jump in. Welcome to the Meaningful Work Matters podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Soren, founder of Eudaimonic by Design. On this podcast, we'll dive into the world of meaningful work, explore its complexities, and examine its impact on people and the organizations they're a part of. Each episode features insightful conversations with cutting-edge experts who are successfully navigating the challenges of meaningful work. We hope to offer you ideas, frameworks, and tools to unlock potential and design work that's fulfilling, impactful, and supports everyone's well-being. Subscribe or follow us now, and let's make meaningful work matter. Kevin Aho, I'm really happy that you are here on the podcast. I think it's been 2 and a bit years that I've been waiting for this opportunity to actually have you here and to talk with you on this particular podcast. I've gotten to know you a little bit through the amazing work of Carol Riff and the ways that she's brought different people who just are sites of inspiration together to talk about really complex and thorny topics when it comes to, trying to figure out how we bridge the arts and sciences for human betterment. And so maybe some of the things that we'll get to talk about today are some of the things that I've heard you share in that context. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Andrew. It's my pleasure.
Maybe we can just start. Why don't you tell the audience who you are and what makes your work meaningful?
Well, my name is Kevin Aho. I'm a professor of philosophy at Florida Gulf Coast University in Southwest Florida. I've been there my whole academic career, 22 years now. I've been department chair for going on 11 years. Florida is a strange place, as you know, but I love my university. I love my colleagues. And the town has finally grown on me. My area of research is broad and interdisciplinary, but I'm mostly known for my work in existentialism, phenomenology, and the philosophy of health and illness. It's interesting that you bring up Carol Riff because I'm on sabbatical right now and am with her in her department or her institute on aging at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and just loving it up here in Madison. What a wonderful town. The question of meaningful work is, of course, an important one for academics because we have this sense that the academy provides a space where real meaning can be pursued. You have autonomy, you have a kind of flexibility in terms of your schedule, and some measure of freedom in terms of what you want to work on. All of that is being called into question now as higher education becomes increasingly corporatized, being shaken up by neoliberal politics, and we are feeling that acutely in the United States, not just at public universities, but at elite private institutions as well. But I have to say, I was lucky, very lucky, first to get a job with a PhD in philosophy. The job market is awful, as you can imagine. I was one of the lucky ones. I've had a stable career. And the thing that gives my job meaning, for me in particular, is that I'm able to work out problems regarding my own life in my research and in the classroom. So, a key component of my research and pedagogical identity is to explore the question of what it means to be human. And oftentimes that involves questions of suffering, of confusion, anxiety, struggle. And that has prepared me for my own struggles in my life. Different kinds of upheavals and emergencies have emerged in my own life. And philosophy and the methods of phenomenology have been allowed me to kind of therapeutically work through these issues that are universal to being human. And so in 2018, for instance, I had a major heart attack that almost cost me my life. And it was followed by a number of major complications. And I was able to write a book about it. And then a few years ago, I suffered another more complex health emergency and was diagnosed with a strange and rare neurological condition that is medically unexplainable, but it's a neurological dystonia that affects speech and oral facial movement. And that has opened up a whole new avenue of exploration for me. And I published a number of articles, spoken about it on podcasts and at conferences. And I'm working on a new book here while I'm on sabbatical on the experience. And I don't want to be overly dramatic about this, but in many ways, my work has saved my life a number of times. It has helped me through episodes of major depression, relationship crises, and then several major health emergencies. And I'm fortunate enough to have the freedom to write about this and then have it count as part of my professional development, as part of my scholarly profile. I'm not trapped in a particular disciplinary bubble. I can write on medicine, sociology, social psychology, the history of health and illness, philosophy, and nobody in the upper administration is telling me that that's not what we hired you for. Sometimes I forget how lucky and fortunate I am to have been able to land in that spot and have that kind of autonomy in terms of my own scholarly development.
It makes me think a little bit of conversations that I've been able to have with David Bluestein and just his work on the psychology of working. And he sometimes talks about a 2x2 where you kind of pit together meaning and decency. You know, lots of people have neither meaning or decency in their
Yeah.
jobs. Probably the majority of workers don't. Some people have a lot of decency, but very little meaning. Some people have an enormous amount of meaning, but very little decency. The lucky few who have both meaning and decency, probably getting to be a department chair and do the kind of multidisciplinary work and write about your life and feel fairly secure that you've got a job for as long as you're ever going to want it.
It's very rare. But I will say, and this is something that Carol Riff and I have been talking about pretty extensively with a couple of our colleagues at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, that is becoming increasingly under threat, that kind of combination of meaning and decency in higher ed. There is increasing pressure to meet certain metrics, to justify their existence as someone in the humanities. This is something that we've had to do in philosophy every couple of years. We have to justify why we're important, what we provide to students, coming up with vocational data in terms of postgraduate career opportunities. That's not going to change. And so if there ever was a golden age of higher ed, and I'm not sure there ever was, philosophy departments were all white men of relative privilege. So it might have been the golden age for some people, not for most people. It is alarming to see that encroachment on an otherwise safe haven for
Mm,
a job filled with meaning and decency, and what I also add, autonomy,
mhm,
is being increasingly stripped away from faculty in terms of what they can teach, certain words they can use. And again, this isn't just something that applies to state universities, and it's also not something that just applies to American institutions as well. This is happening in Canada, as you know. It's
mhm.
happening in the UK.
There's There's so much. I'm based in Halifax in Nova Scotia. And in Nova Scotia, there are government policies now. You're speaking to the vocational aspect of it, where the government is saying if you can't justify the vocational outcomes of your liberal arts programs, for example, and prove that those liberal arts programs in early modern studies or in philosophy or whatever it might be are going to guarantee a job out of university and a job that are the kind of jobs we want around here,
Yeah.
and we're just not going to fund you anymore. That's a very real reality for a whole bunch of universities that are in Nova Scotia, including my alma mater, University of King's College, which is a liberal arts
Yeah.
you know.
That's what's so ironic, isn't it, Andrew? This whole notion of liberal arts colleges gutting the heart of what
Mm,
makes them liberal arts colleges. And
mm,
in the United States, if poorly endowed colleges are shutting down, which is happening a lot. If they're not shutting down, they're gutting the very programs that make them liberal arts colleges. And
mhm,
that's a real sad thing to see, especially when it comes to disciplines like foundational disciplines like philosophy.
mhm,
And I feel for my colleagues in art and theater, language and literature programs, and gender studies programs. It's just something that fills me with a lot of sadness. But I'm especially territorial about philosophy as a core, intellectual and scholarly core of any university. And to have to come up to the Board of Trustees every couple of years and defend our existence, that reading Plato and Aristotle and Kant and Nietzsche is valuable, intrinsically valuable and important for the civic education of our students, is just bizarre to me.
Let's
And
go there. I'm kind of curious about the argument that
mhm,
you use. Like, why? Why is the liberal arts, in your opinion? Why is philosophy? Why should we be reading our Aristotle or Kant?
to me, it's not even, it's such a simple question, or simple answer to a complex question. And the answer for me is to understand what it means to be human and to understand what it means to be in a world. And without those two questions being answered, we can't talk about justice, truth, equality, morality, none of those things that hold a civilization together can be explored in any rigorous and rich way. And when those intellectual curiosities are cut off for students, where will they learn about what justice is, or what truth is, or what morality is, or what being a virtuous human being is? You end up becoming someone who owns a trade. And universities are increasingly becoming trade schools. That affects, in a way, rippling out into the broader culture. It affects what we see on television, in movies, in literature, on social media. It bleeds out into all areas of our lives. It affects our ability to communicate effectively with other people. It affects our ability to think critically about complex issues. I was talking to one of Carol Riff's colleagues, a historian of higher ed, who was at the conference in August, and he said something to the effect that institutions like Harvard are endowments with a university attached to it, a hedge fund with a
Mhm.
university attached to it. And we've seen how Harvard has an institution as powerful as that has capitulated to some of the political forces at play in the United States right now.
I feel like there's certainly an institutional and maybe much more broadly a structural reality to what you're describing in terms of
Mhm.
the ways in which universities have, used the term neoliberal, and maybe that's probably a term that we should unpack. But I think it also probably transcends down to the individual and just drives behavior in
Yeah.
a way. I mean, I've heard you talk about a kind of a culture of busyness that is pervasive because of that,
Yeah.
whether it's publish or perish or just this relentless pursuit of the need to be busy at the expense of potentially doing anything that's genuinely meaningful or about the collective good. But maybe let's just start with like what's neoliberalism, or at least what do
Right.
you mean when you talk about kind of neoliberal
Well, when I talk about neoliberal individualism, of course, the word liberal is a little bit misleading in that compound term. Really, what neoliberal individualism in a political context tends to convey is the gutting of welfare support, social safety nets that protect vulnerable human beings, and promoting ideology that everyone should be self sufficient,
Mhm,
everyone should be self reliant, and not depend on the largesse of the state or the government to support you in any way, even in times of crisis. So, in the United States, neoliberal politics emerges oftentimes most painfully and disturbingly in the healthcare system, where getting ill, seriously ill in the United States can oftentimes mean bankruptcy, where you lose everything because you have no health insurance or you lost your job and your healthcare was tied to your job. That whole myth of self-reliance, of autonomy, of pulling oneself up by their bootstraps is baked into the mythology of
mhm,
American culture. I'm talking about the United States. It really is a conception, a philosophical conception about what a human being is. A
mhm,
human being is an atomistic, free, self-reliant subject.
mhm,
And of course, we aren't. We are
mhm,
dependent, vulnerable, mutually reliant on other people. And without that sense of relationality and intersubjectivity, the structure of societies begins to crack
mhm,
and can collapse. And we're seeing that in the United States right now with the radical violence that we've been witnessing, the political extremism, silencing of dissenting voices, and it's an alarming thing to see. Now, that's not to say that all aspects of neoliberal economics are problematic at all. It means that when neoliberal ideology becomes the only game in town, it becomes
mhm.
the default setting for how we interpret ourselves, then we have a real crisis on our hands.
It is a mindset or a way of viewing things, a point of view that does infiltrate into all sorts of different ways in which, organizations are structured too. So, lest you're thinking, oh, this is just about government or governmental policy, it's very much, a way in which organizations are
Yeah,
often run, and
exactly.
maybe a shift in organizations towards more of a, let's use kind of an Uber as an example, a kind of precarious work context where,
Yeah,
you're in it for yourself
yeah,
and you work as much as you want to work. And there's
hmm
a kind of radical freedom that's potentially offered in that. But
yeah,
then there's all of the social protection, security, equity, freedom,
yeah,
potentially the dignity that's taken away from
yeah.
jobs without
Yeah,
those bigger
that's such a
protections.
great point. I was going to bring that up, Andrew. That notion of these increasing number of jobs that are basically exploitative labor with no benefits, no protections, no health insurance, that are required now for survival in a neoliberal context. So I have colleagues who are ranked faculty that work part time to make ends meet in these gig jobs. And that notion of the gig economy is becoming so pervasive now that it's almost like an expectation that, well, if my own career doesn't pan out, at least I can drive Uber or do
Mhm.
DoorDash or
Absolutely.
something like that. And
Yeah.
uh, there's really this is an illusion of freedom. You really
Yeah.
don't have freedom at all. You become an entrepreneur of yourself, and you are a slave to your own survival.
Mhm.
There's nothing that's going to pick you up in terms of benefits, in terms of insurance, in terms of other welfare safety nets.
Yeah. And I mean, just going back to the earlier conversation about academics, I mean, lest we think that all academics are in places of great decency and
Exactly.
meaning. I mean, there was a strike back in Halifax that just ended this week with that really revolved, at Dalhousie University. They really revolved around people who are in really precarious working conditions, who don't have tenure, who
Yeah.
are adjunct faculty,
Mhm.
who are contracted because universities are choosing not to necessarily make more tenured positions because they know, instead of paying someone $100,000 a year, I can actually just pay an individual $5,000 a course. And then that's great. And then the rest of it's up to them. I want to pivot this conversation a little bit because beyond these structural things, and maybe and maybe not necessarily even beyond, I think maybe directly related to these structural things, there is an ethos that goes along with some of these neoliberal ideas that I think a lot of people, and specifically a lot of people in the industry that I'm part of, which you could, I guess, call the wellness industry or the
Yeah, yeah.
well-being industry, which is an industry that has become an enormous multi-billion dollar annual industry, and a lot of that is predicated on this sense of individualized freedom, this focus on the self. And I'm wondering whether we can just, whether you can help maybe unpack the relationship between those two things. Like how do those things connect together?
I think there is a very close relationship between neoliberal politics and the rise of the wellness industry, where wellness becomes a personal responsibility and the individual becomes accountable for their own mental and physical health. And it's become kind of a buzzword in the healthcare space, if you want to call it that, broadly speaking. And the idea is no one else is responsible for your well being but you.
Mm,
You have to take ownership of your physical and emotional health, regardless of the social, political, and historical stressors that are forcibly imposed on you by the world that you live in. People that are have historically marginalized identities, people that come from a lower socioeconomic strata, identities that conflict with heteronormative or racialized profiles are expected to perform at the same level.
Mm,
as everyone else, even though they are struggling with structural impediments that are centuries old, or in the case of certain forms of marginality, thousands of years old. That to me is what's so shocking and appalling. And if you look at the wellness industry from a social data perspective, you'll find, and I know there's some recent research on this, that it's predominantly a white industry.
mm,
Most of the purveyors of wellness in the social media space, in the technology space in Silicon Valley, these are all white people of some real privilege. And uh, those people that are living on the margins may download Insight Timer on their phone for
mm,
stress release, but the people going to the meditation retreats in Esalen or at Spirit Rock and paying $20,000 for a week of eating vegan cuisine and chanting and taking ayahuasca. That is not the general population at all. I've been having some really pleasant conversations with one of Carol's graduate students. We meet every week, and he told me yesterday that the University of Wisconsin's psychology program, which is a high-powered, world-renowned program,
mm,
has one woman of color in the whole department, and that's telling.
mhm,
It's very alarming. A study that was published in 2012, I believe, reported that 0.5% of every professional philosopher in the United States was a woman of color. Now that's changed quite a bit in the last decade, thanks to some activism on the part of the American Philosophical Association and other activist groups. But it's still really poorly represented. I had one woman professor of color in my graduate training. I went to 3 different graduate schools. It's a horrible statistic.
I want to dive deeper into this question of the empty self
Hmm.
because it was a term that you introduced me to. I know that it's not yours, but it spoke to me an immense amount. And I guess the context for me is in thinking about well-being or wellness, and not only who the practitioners and users of that are, but also even how, like, what the ambitions or the goals or the measures of well-being
Yeah.
are within the industry. It's very self-oriented. I mean, it's, Mohsen Joshinlu, who has been on this podcast, has talked about kind of the fact that if you look at Western definitions of well-being, and compare those to Eastern or indigenous or traditional perspectives of well-being, Western well-being is almost always very predicated on the self. It's about self-growth. It's about self-development. It's about self-actualization.
Yeah.
It is about the self as opposed to other versions of well-being that might be much more about the group or about we or about collectivism.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, tell us about the empty self.
Well, the empty self is a term that I borrow from a social psychologist named Philip Cushman, who is just a wonderful writer and a social theorist who is really influenced by the work of German phenomenology, especially Martin Heidegger and Gadamer, Hans-Georg Gadamer, who is a student of Heidegger's. And what the empty self suggests is that thing that makes us feel a void in ourselves, a feeling, what Heidegger calls self-forming emptiness, is a loss of a sense of community, a belongingness, of a sense that our world is a relational world and that we are mutually dependent on each other for our own well-being. What happened at the turn of the century, in the late 19th and early 20th century, due in large part to the Protestant ethos that American immigrants brought with them to the United States, was this intense focus on personal responsibility, self-reliance, this idea that we are at bottom masterful individuals, self-sufficient individuals. Cushman talks about how what began to emerge in the late 19th and early 20th century was the development of the charismatic self, a self that is charming, loquacious, socially engaging, can communicate effectively. In other words, a salesman. We created a culture of salespeople. And the quieter, more introspective, shy temperaments were kind of stigmatized, and oftentimes stigmatized from a racial perspective because that stereotype often had anti-Semitic undertones. That the quiet, shy types were Jewish, right?
Right.
Introspective, overly intellectual, whereas the gregarious, outgoing, confident person was not. That became kind of baked in to the American myth. Those people trapped in that cycle of selling themselves, of marketing themselves, becoming an entrepreneur of themselves is so glaringly evident today when we see things like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, where they're constantly selling something. And when they're selling something, they're also consuming something. So this endless cycle of selling a certain self-presentation while at the same time consuming wellness apps, gurus, self-help, life coaches, in your case, politicians, Prozac, whatever, shopping. So the empty self is a sense that we're trying to fill a void that can't be filled by commodities, by stuff. And stuff includes wellness. It includes mindfulness. It includes hot yoga. It includes all of that stuff. So you're consuming. And what at the heart of all of this, and I follow Cushman and Heidegger and Gadamer in this regard, is that what we're really yearning for is a sense of community, that we belong together, that we feel secure and safe in the world that we inhabit, that we feel that if an emergency occurs or a crisis occurs, my fellow citizens will come to my aid, or my government will come to my aid and help me out if I'm diagnosed with cancer or if I lose my job. The only way the empty self can be filled is if we somehow recover a sense of relationality, a sense of intersubjectivity that is at the heart of the human condition.
I want to bring this conversation kind of back to where we started. It's kind of wonderfully circular. I mean, number one, what you've described is totally connected to this neoliberal worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a worldview that prioritizes consumerism, and it prioritizes the individual, and it prioritizes freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And it misses something. It misses something very fundamental. And yet it allows us a context where we actually look for politicians, for organizations, for jobs that give us those kinds of things, because it is something that we desperately desire. And in the same moment, that neoliberal worldview, as applied in a structural way, eliminates all the structural supports, all of the opportunities to be able to create that safety net, to be able to
Mhm.
create the collective, to focus on the we, the extensive focus on the me, the extensive focus on the self, and the recognition that that is an empty existential void,
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
right? Is something that eats away at our soul.
Yeah, exactly. I think that notion, eating away at the soul, points to a kind of spiritual barrenness that we all feel, and it's also one of the reasons why New Age spirituality has become such an explosive growth market in the U.S. That in that space of spiritual emptiness, we're clinging or reaching out and grasping for something that
Mhm,
can give our lives meaning. And the appropriation of Eastern philosophy or New Age spirituality is one of the manifestations of that.
mhm,
And I don't know what the future holds in terms of the fate of Western civilization. I mean, we've seen major upheavals throughout history, but you can get a sense of this sense of alienation and loneliness and longing for community in the rise of Trumpism in the United States. I mean, the appeal of Trump to so many is he's speaking for those who have been left behind, who have
mhm,
been forgotten in dying industrial towns, in the Midwest, in rural communities, and this privileging of elite coastal city life. Trump, in many ways, is an incarnation of what many Americans are feeling. We want that sense that I'm with you, I'm speaking for you. And when, in fact, of course, none of that is really true at all. It's the same. I think it's also similar to the Obama effect. That Obama
mhm.
brought forth this sense of, oh, we're together again as a
Right.
country. We're bound
The
to
audacity of hope.
exactly the audacity of hope. That sense that we healed the wounds of racism and all of the other isms of haunted American history. And so it's not really a partisan argument at all. The charismatic leader, whether it's Obama or Trump, both speak to that sense of longing for connection, for belonging, and filling a spiritual void.
It makes me think about where we go. And I mean, one of the reasons why this goes back to why philosophy and the liberal arts is so important, right?
Yeah, I
We
agree.
need different models. We need
I
different ways
agree.
of being able to see that there are different ways of being able
Mhm.
to think, that there is such thing as potentially a collective good, or the idea that relationality is possible.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that educational institutions have to play a vital role in that. And the problem is pushing against the structural impediments that higher education is now imposing on faculty and scholars. The movement is not going to be a massive political resistance. It's going to start at the grassroots level. It's going
Yeah.
to start locally, pushing back at a faculty senate meeting, people with similar values rising into upper administration and speaking truth to power to university presidents and chancellors and boards of trustees. I think education is a starting point, but education does not necessarily have to be located in an academic institution.
No,
Like,
no.
think about your podcast. Think about local musicians. Think about community farmers markets and
Absolutely.
local art. And so education doesn't have to involve necessarily a formal institution, but some community space or public space where the deep questions of justice, civility, the good life can be seriously engaged.
Yeah, I think that there is a social prescription to this. And it involves, right, getting out of the self,
Mm-hmm.
becoming an opportunity to find a we, to
Yeah,
engage at a local level.
exactly. And maybe even more being a little bit more philosophical in terms of framing this, coming to realize that the self was an illusion all along, that
Mm,
there is no self. Like there is no real me inside. Like I look inside and like, oh, there I am. No, you are scattered and dispersed into a community always.
mhm.
And so coming to an awareness that there's some authentic me inside that I can uncover or recover by means of psychotherapy or psychedelics or Oprah or Dr. Phil. None of that is going to unlock the child within or the authentic self. The self is really a historical construct that began to emerge in the late Middle Ages and the Enlightenment. Like Aristotle didn't believe in a notion of an atomistic self. The
No,
human being was a political animal. We are bound together in a polis, and so realizing that there never was a self to begin with might be a first step.
I love it. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, what is Kevin's simple answer to this problem? I think that it is abandoned the notion that you have a self.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
And also love, Andrew. I think love is key. That without that, without love, care, and compassion for others who are suffering, because we will all be suffering, we're in bad shape.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you for sharing some wisdom that only philosophy could impart.
Thank you, Andrew, for having me, and we will cross paths face to face soon.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Meaningful Work Matters. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And if this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us make this podcast better and reach more listeners. You can connect with me, Andrew Soren, on LinkedIn, or visit www.eubd.ca to learn more about eudaimonic by design. Finally, if what you heard today spoke to you, tell your colleagues and people in your community about our podcast. We really appreciate your support in making meaningful work matter. See you next time.